I used to believe loyalty meant something. 13 years of my life poured into Clarion Crest Holdings like lifeblood. I helped revive a company that was barely breathing, transforming it from a legacy on life support into a thriving $85 million empire. I stayed up through nights, traveled across continents, pitched to arrogant investors in glass towers, and rolled up my sleeves in conference rooms that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Not for applause. Not for credit. Just for the family. That night, as I sat at the Caldwell family dinner table, the table I had helped pay for, the one surrounded by chairs filled with people I once thought were mine, I expected a toast. A simple thank you, maybe? Something to acknowledge what I had done. 13 years isn't a footnote. It's a lifetime. Instead, Evelyn Caldwell, matriarch, ice queen, and the woman who used to call me her daughter, lifted her wine glass and gave me that thin-lipped smile she reserved for waiters and strangers. "We have a very exciting announcement," she said, her voice crisp with champagne and cruelty. Brandon was beside her, wearing his usual navy blazer, and that smug expression that had crept in lately, the one I used to chalk up to stress. I should have known. He leaned forward and took my hand gently, like a man rehearsing sincerity. "Clarion Crest is entering a new era," he said. "And with that comes a new face of leadership." I blinked, confused. My fork hovered over a rosemary lamb chop. "A new era?" I echoed. He nodded, eyes sparkling. "My fiancée, Sienna, will be stepping into your role. She's already been shadowing the past few weeks." My body didn't move. Not a muscle. I sat there like a sculpture, carved in chalk. Around me, time seemed to bend, stretch. I could hear the faint scrape of a spoon against a dessert plate from someone down the table. A cousin. Maybe one of the lawyers. I didn't look. Sienna. Blonde, 29, ex-model turned business advisor, whatever that meant. I had seen her twice in passing, once at an investor brunch, once slipping out of the office with Brandon when he thought I was in Dubai. I wasn't. "She has fresh ideas," Evelyn added, casually. "Youth. Presence. And you've done enough heavy lifting. It's time for you to rest. Rest. Like a dog put down after pulling the sled too long." I looked at Brandon. "You're replacing me. At the company I built." He had the audacity to smile, as if he were offering me a gift. "We thought this would be a nice way to transition. You can still be involved in a consulting capacity. Just not on paper." The air in my lungs froze. I had sat through hostile takeovers, fought with banks, soothed angry stakeholders. But this? This was personal. No board vote. I asked, voice flat. "No formal notice?" Evelyn tilted her head. "It's family, dear. We assumed we could handle it internally." Family. That word rang hollow now, echoing through my ribs. I stood slowly, cloth napkin falling from my lap to the floor like snow. I smoothed my dress, deep emerald silk that suddenly felt like armor. My voice was ice. "Is this why you invited me here?" "To watch my own execution." Brandon stood too, clearly trying to keep control of the moment. "It's not like that." "No?" I asked. "Then what is it like, Brandon? Enlighten me." He hesitated, and that told me everything. There was no answer. There was only betrayal, polished with fine wine and served on bone china. Evelyn lifted her glass again, smug. "Let's not make a scene. Be gracious. You've had a good run." Gracious. I turned to her, forcing a smile so sharp it could slice stone. "You'll get your scene. Just not the one you think." Without another word, I walked away. Past the antique hutch filled with heirloom silver I'd polished myself once, trying to impress Evelyn in the early days. Past the hallway where Brandon had once proposed with trembling hands and borrowed poetry. Out the heavy oak door and into the cool night, where the silence finally let me breathe. When I reached my car, my hands trembled, not from sadness. From the electric fury racing beneath my skin. They thought they could erase me. Replace me. They didn't know the truth. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I drove home on a quiet street and parked in my garage. Then I walked upstairs, kicked off my heels, and opened the drawer I had always kept locked. Inside were files, legal ones, ownership agreements, corporate documents, quiet moves I had made over the years while they assumed I was just a loyal worker, a devoted wife, a useful pawn. They thought I built their empire. They were wrong. I had built mine. And I was about to remind them exactly who they tried to erase. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I didn't call anyone to rage or sob or beg for comfort. That's what they expected. That's the story they wanted, me broken, emotional, powerless. But I'd already rehearsed this moment too many times in my mind to let it fracture me now. The betrayal hurt, yes, but not in a way that left me bleeding. It burned me clean. When I stepped through the front door of the home I used to share with Brandon, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt sacred. It was the kind of silence you only get right before something monumental changes. I walked through the hallway like I owned it, which I did. The house, the mortgage, the deed, all in my name. One of the many things Brandon never paid attention to. He always thought I'd be the one holding things together, no matter what he tore apart. I went upstairs, stepped out of my dress, folded it neatly, and laid it across the back of my vanity chair. Then I opened the safe hidden behind the mirror, typed in the code, and pulled out the files I'd been updating for years. This wasn't revenge. It was insurance. There, printed on the thick, cream-colored pages, were the clauses and contracts, the quiet amendments, the transferred shares. Everything I'd built while they weren't looking. Evelyn had always demanded trust, demanded silence, demanded gratitude. What she didn't realize was that while she dismissed me as the obedient daughter-in-law, I was securing my power, one document at a time. Clarion Crest Holdings wasn't Brandon's inheritance. It wasn't Evelyn's legacy. It was mine. I held 62% ownership, legally, silently, strategically. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the documents spread before me like puzzle pieces already solved. I remembered the meetings Evelyn had asked me not to attend, the ones she claimed were family-only or above my pay grade. I remembered the moments Brandon brushed off my questions with half-answers and dismissive smiles. I remembered every time they underestimated me, and I remembered how that underestimation had become my greatest weapon. They thought they were playing chess, but I had built the board, placed the pieces, and written the rules. All they ever did was perform. I turned on my laptop, plugged in the secure hard drive, and backed everything up twice. One to the cloud, one to a private, undisclosed server I'd bought in my maiden name years ago. I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. I emailed my legal team with a brief subject line: activate. No explanation needed. They'd been waiting for that word for years. I made a call to the head of the board, Frederick Langston. He picked up on the second ring. "Helena," he said, surprised. "It's late." "It's time," I said, calmly. "Emergency board meeting. First thing tomorrow morning." He didn't ask questions. He never did. Frederick was old school, one of the few men in that boardroom who had respected me from day one. "Understood," he replied. "I'll notify the others." I ended the call and leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't tired. I felt sharper than ever. Like the betrayal had burned away the fog, the softness, the comfort I had once clung to in the name of family. There was no family anymore. Not with Brandon. Not with Evelyn. They had cut that cord themselves. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. And when I woke, I didn't hesitate. I dressed with precision, a tailored black suit, silk blouse, gold pin at the collar. Not a widow's mourning. A queen's armor. I pinned up my hair, slipped on heels, and looked at myself in the mirror for one long moment. My reflection stared back at me, cool, composed, ready. This was the woman they didn't expect. This was the woman they tried to erase. And tomorrow morning, they'd learn erasure only works when the target stays quiet. I packed my documents, shut the safe, and walked out the door without looking back. The house, the past, the memories, it was all fuel now. Everything they'd taken from me, every slight and smirk, every dismissal, would become leverage. I would use their own arrogance as the hammer to dismantle their illusions. They thought they had ended my reign. What they didn't know was, I hadn't even started it yet. The morning air was brisk, scented with a promise of change, or maybe that was just the scent of fire rising from old empires about to be reduced to ash. I parked exactly where I always used to, front row, third slot from the left. The same reserved space Evelyn had once offered to me with a patronizing smile and the words, "You've earned this, Helena." No, I hadn't earned a parking space. I had earned the building. Clarion Crest Holdings rose before me like a fortress. I had walked into this building for years with my head down, focused on the spreadsheets, the boardroom briefings, the endless late nights they never noticed. Today, I walked in like I owned it because I did. People stared. Not in a curious way. In a startled way. The kind of look you give a ghost you thought you'd buried. The receptionist, Olivia, blinked twice and stood up halfway as I strode in. "Mrs. Caldwell." "Miss Hart," I corrected sharply. "Effective immediately." She nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." "Ms. Hart, the boardroom is being set up." "It's already set." She didn't question it. Smart girl. The click of my heels on the marble floors was a metronome marking the end of their fantasy. I wasn't there to explain myself. I wasn't there to ask for my seat back. I was there to reclaim what was mine and let them choke on their arrogance. Inside the boardroom, the long obsidian table gleamed beneath overhead lights. 12 seats, 8 already filled. Some old faces I'd fought beside. Others who had once questioned my authority in whispers. But today, none of them met my eyes with disdain. They looked intrigued. Afraid, even. Good. Frederick Langston gave me a single nod. "You called the meeting, Helena. Floor's yours." I opened my briefcase and set the folder down without a word. 12 crisp copies. Each bearing the header, Shareholder Ownership Summary, Clarion Crest Holdings. Brandon, Evelyn, and Sienna walked in just as I handed out the last sheet. Sienna wore a peach blouse that screamed, "I want to be taken seriously," but the nervous glance she gave Evelyn betrayed her. She was out of her depth. Brandon, on the other hand, wore a smirk. A man still convinced this was a formality. Evelyn didn't smile. She was too calculating for that. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, like she smelled blood but wasn't sure whose it was yet. "You called an emergency meeting," she said, coolly. I nodded. "Yes, to discuss the future of Clarion Crest Holdings." Brandon scoffed. "You don't have the authority." I turned to him, sliding a single sheet across the table like it was a royal decree. 62%, I said simply. Legally signed, notarized, and filed. Over the last 8 years, I've quietly acquired a controlling interest in Clarion Crest. Through subsidiary expansions, shell partnership rollovers, and strategic investments in dormant Class B shares. Sienna leaned toward the paper like she could decipher it if she stared long enough. Brandon picked up one of the copies, eyes scanning faster now, jaw beginning to clench. This is a trick." Evelyn remained quiet. Her fingers curled slightly against the wood of the table. "No trick," I said, tapping the top corner of the page. "Board verified. Legal counsel notarized. I've had the authority for over a year. I just chose not to use it until you gave me a reason." Frederick cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the documents. They check out." Brandon's voice cracked louder than he intended. "You're going to humiliate us like this?" "No, Brandon," I replied, meeting his eyes with something sharper than anger, clarity. "You did that all on your own. I came here with respect. You offered me erasure. This is just balance." Sienna made a faint sound beside him, but I didn't even glance at her. "This meeting has a single agenda," I continued. "Effective immediately, Helena Hart assumes full CEO authority and operational oversight. The board is advised to recognize the transfer of power already in effect. One of the older members, Whitmore, lifted his head slowly. And the role Evelyn holds? I turned to her. Ceremonial. She'll retain a title if she chooses, but no voting power, no oversight. The empire must move forward. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice brittle but sharp. You think you've won? I smiled. No, Evelyn. I've simply claimed what I always owned. Brandon slammed his folder shut and stood, knocking his chair back. This isn't over. I didn't flinch. It never is. They walked out without another word, 3 shadows shrinking under the weight of their own pride. And the board? They stayed seated, eyes on me now, not with confusion or doubt, but something closer to awe. The crown wasn't given. I took it. There was no need to yell. No need to gloat. No fireworks or grandstanding. Power didn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it simply sat at the head of the table, unshaken, undeniable. That morning, I didn't just reclaim my seat, I made sure they knew it had never belonged to them in the first place. The documents spoke louder than any insult Evelyn had ever whispered, louder than the dismissive silence Brandon wrapped around my years of sacrifice. And now came the part they weren't prepared for. By 10 o'clock, I called for the press. A routine statement, nothing dramatic on the surface. Just a scheduled appearance in the glass-walled conference hall downstairs. The same one Evelyn loved to host her legacy breakfasts in. I stood at the podium she used to dominate, now surrounded by high-ranking staff, investors, board members, and the tight-lipped assistants who always seemed to know more than they were paid to admit. Behind me, the monitors displayed our branding, Clarion Crest's new logo. Sleek, modern, stripped of the old crest that Evelyn clung to like a relic of her fading power. Today was about clarity, authority, rebirth. When the room filled, I waited a heartbeat longer, then gave a small nod to my assistant. The doors opened. Evelyn walked in first, chin high, shoulders set. Brandon followed, face tight, fists clenched at his sides. And finally, Sienna. Dressed in corporate beige, wide-eyed and out of place, trying desperately to look like she belonged in the room she had no right to enter. I didn't acknowledge them. I didn't need to. They were not guests. They were not allies. They were exhibits, examples of what arrogance looked like when stripped of consequence. I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for coming on short notice, I said, voice calm, composed, the picture of professional control. As of this morning, Clarion Crest Holdings has undergone an internal restructuring. Murmurs echoed through the room. This move reflects a redirection of our company values toward transparency, innovation, and accountability. Effective immediately, I have assumed the roles of chairwoman and chief executive officer. I paused, allowing the words to settle. You could hear a pin drop. I want to thank the previous leadership for their service, I continued, gaze drifting briefly, just briefly, toward Evelyn. But as we look ahead, it's clear that our future demands new stewardship. Sienna leaned in to whisper something to Brandon, but he ignored her. His jaw was twitching. Evelyn's expression didn't flicker. But I saw it, the slight pinch of her right eye, the imperceptible tension in her neck. They were unraveling. And I hadn't even begun. As we make this transition, I said, I've extended opportunities to current executives to remain under this new structure, if they so choose. More murmurs. That was the line. The dare. Brandon stepped forward, as if rehearsed. I'd like to clarify something, he said, lifting his voice just enough. My fiancée, Sienna, has been slated to take on an advisory role in our future growth initiatives. That position is still recognized under our internal vision. No, I said, cutting him off without raising my voice. It's not. He blinked. I turned to Sienna. You're not inheriting anything here. No roles. No voice. No seat at the table. The only thing you'll take with you is regret. Gasps spread across the room like wildfire. Sienna's lips parted, but no words came. Her face turned pale, then blotched with color. She reached for Brandon's arm, but he stepped away, his instinct for self-preservation already kicking in. I looked back at the crowd. This company was built on endurance, not entitlement. I will not allow nepotism, personal ambition, or favoritism to derail the vision we fought to create. Anyone who remains does so by merit. Nothing else. Brandon's voice cracked. You can't just erase us. But you tried to erase me, I said, eyes locking on his. At a dinner table. With champagne. With a new fiancé at your side. You bet against the wrong woman, Brandon. And I never forget the odds. Evelyn took a breath, stepped forward. Helena, this doesn't need to be public. I gave a soft, almost kind smile. But it is. And with that, I turned away from all three of them and faced the room. I welcome those of you who are ready to lead with integrity, I said. As for the rest, consider this your formal invitation to walk. And they did. Brandon was first, storming out like a tantrum in human form, Sienna trailing after him in confused humiliation. Evelyn lingered, her lips parting like she wanted to say something profound, something cutting. But nothing came. She turned and left, her heels echoing across the floor like a slow, reluctant surrender. I remained standing, still as stone, until the doors closed behind them. Only then did the room exhale. Applause rose, not loud, not theatrical. Just enough. Enough to mark the moment, to etch it in the stone of memory. Not because I was ruthless, but because I was right. I never believed in revenge for its own sake. What they did to me wasn't just personal, it was strategic, calculated. So, my response couldn't be emotional. It had to be devastatingly precise. And it was. The public humiliation had barely faded from their memories when I began the real work, quiet, methodical, irreversible. While the office buzzed with whispers and awe at the recent shakeup, I slipped away to the archives, the one place Evelyn always assumed I'd never bother with. To her, the past was hers to shape. She believed only the future mattered to people like me. She was wrong. The past, with all its ink stains and fine print, was a vault. And I had the key. I descended the back stairwell into the secured records floor, swiping my own ID badge across the cold steel scanner. A green light blinked. The doors hissed open. Inside, the room was dim, humming with the slow breath of machines that hadn't been touched in years. Cabinets stretched wall to wall, filing drawers neatly labeled, rows of ledger books in locked glass cases. It was a museum of Clarion Crest's soul and its sins. Evelyn never thought I'd come here because she believed her secrets were buried too deep. She forgot I was the one who created the filing system 10 years ago when no one else would stay after hours. I knew where everything lived. I knew what it looked like. I knew the scent of dust on fraud. I pulled open the drawer labeled Financial, Executive Bonuses, 2015 to 2022. At first glance, the reports looked clean, sanitized. But I wasn't looking for what was shown, I was looking for what had been deliberately hidden. It took 3 hours. I cross-referenced reports, payout schedules, and off-site bank deposit slips. Then I found it for transactions, all under different shell companies, all funneled into the same foreign account. Not enough to trigger alarms. But when you added the layers, the consulting fees, the dummy vendors, the expense reports, it told a story Evelyn had tried to bury. She had been stealing from her own empire. Falsified transactions, offshore diversions, and inflated bonuses awarded to Brandon during years we reported losses to shareholders. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. I took photos of every document, printed copies, made digital backups. Then I went deeper. Into the special projects drawer, another label I remembered stamping myself. Inside, I found contracts Sienna had signed before she was even publicly involved. Branding consultations billed under her LLC, despite never attending a single meeting. Over $350,000 paid out in less than 8 months. All preparatory compensation, rubber-stamped by Brandon's login. They were sloppy because they never thought they'd be caught. They never imagined I'd come looking. By the time I emerged from the archives, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't nervous. I was still. A kind of stillness that only comes when every piece has clicked into place. I had them. I returned to my office, locked the door behind me, and called an emergency executive session. The board didn't question it. Not anymore. An hour later, the room filled once again. Fewer people this time. Only the ones who mattered. Evelyn wasn't invited. Brandon wasn't needed. Sienna didn't belong. I stepped up to the screen at the front of the room and began my presentation, not with a speech, not with a flourish. Just facts. This, I said, clicking the remote, is what's been happening behind your backs. Slide by slide, I laid it all out: wire transfers, invoice trails, hidden bonuses, tax discrepancies. There was no confusion. No room for doubt. Each board member stared at the evidence as if watching a car crash they were helpless to stop. Evelyn's signature. Brandon's approval. Sienna's LLC name, appearing again and again. Layered. Twisted. Brazen. No one interrupted me. Not even Frederick. The silence in that room was thicker than walls. I ended the presentation and folded my hands. I will be submitting all of this to our legal department for compliance review. Depending on the results, we may be looking at federal charges for financial misconduct and embezzlement. But before that, I want this board to vote on internal action. Frederick spoke first, his voice low. What are you proposing? Immediate removal of Evelyn Caldwell from all executive titles and board positions. A forfeiture of her remaining shares, redistributed per our misconduct clause. Brandon is to be removed from any advisory capacity, and Sienna Royce is to be permanently blacklisted from Clarion Crest contracts and affiliates. No one moved. Then one by one, hands lifted into the air. Unanimous. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded. This meeting is adjourned. The walk back to my office felt different. It wasn't victory. It was justice. The kind of justice that came with silence and signatures and unshakable proof. They built their power on shadows. I burned every shadow down. Power isn't real until it's enforced. Words only go so far. Evidence? That's just the prelude. Execution, swift, surgical, undeniable, is the moment when a crown stops being ornamental and starts weighing like truth on your shoulders. That morning, I didn't walk into Clarion Crest to negotiate. I walked in to claim blood. The vote from the previous day had sealed it. Evelyn Caldwell was out. Brandon's thin claims to influence were dissolved. Sienna's name would never touch our ledger again. But formalities still needed to be honored. And by honored, I meant televised. At precisely 9:30 a.m., I stepped onto the 20th floor, the executive suite that Evelyn had treated like a royal court. She had chosen everything in that office: the Italian leather chairs, the custom brass light fixtures, the portrait of herself and her late husband, George Caldwell, hung just crooked enough to catch your eye. She curated her illusion like a gallery. Today, I was tearing it down. I didn't knock. I opened the door with my badge override and stepped in. Evelyn was at her desk, flanked by 2 assistants and Brandon, who was pacing near the windows like he was in the final act of a drama he still hoped to rewrite. She didn't stand. She didn't even look surprised. "You're early," she said, folding her hands neatly over a stack of papers. "I'm final," I replied. "Your removal is effective immediately. We gave you the courtesy of 24 hours. That clock just ran out." Brandon looked like he was about to object. Again. "You can't just barge in here like—" "I can," I said without looking at him, "because I now own the space you're standing in, the company you used as your playground, and the future you thought you could control." I turned to Evelyn. "Per the misconduct clause, your remaining shares have been absorbed. Your access has been terminated. Legal has already filed the necessary forms with the SEC." She tilted her head slightly. "You always did love theatrics." "This isn't theater," I said. It's correction. My assistant entered behind me and handed me a sealed folder. I placed it on her desk. Inside are two options, I told her. Option 1, you sign the voluntary exit agreement. You'll receive a modest pension. No public charges. You get to walk away with dignity. Option 2. You refuse, and we proceed with legal action. Embezzlement. Fraud. Conspiracy. Brandon took a step toward me. You're bluffing. I turned, finally giving him my full attention. You really think I came this far without backup? I gestured toward the security team now standing quietly outside the door. You'll both be escorted off the premises. You can choose how loud it gets. Evelyn opened the folder, glanced through it. I saw her eyes pause on the clause about public proceedings. Her fingers trembled, just once. Then she set the pen down. I won't give you the satisfaction of a scene, she said. You already did, I said softly, at the dinner table. Brandon stared at me like he couldn't believe this was happening. Like I had transformed overnight. But I hadn't. I had simply stopped hiding. You used me, I said, facing him fully. For years. You let me build this empire while you posed for it. And when it got too real, when my success started to eclipse your name, you tried to cut me out. You chose Sienna and her pedigree. You thought charm could replace competence. He opened his mouth, but I lifted a hand. I'm not interested in your apology. Or your excuses. You can take them with you. Evelyn stood slowly, smoothed her blazer, and walked around the desk with her chin high. She paused when she reached me. You've made a lot of enemies, Helena, she said quietly. Don't think they won't wait for you to fall. I leaned in, my voice lower still. Let them wait. I'm not falling. I'm ascending. Security stepped in. Brandon shoved his hands in his pockets, his face burning red. Sienna didn't show. I assumed she'd already disappeared into whatever spa or influencer deal she'd scurried off to. She had always been a ghost of ambition, visible only in mirrors and mistakes. As Evelyn and Brandon were let out, the entire 20th floor went still. Employees watched silently through glass walls, some wide-eyed, others barely hiding their satisfaction. Whispers would follow. So would headlines. I turned to my assistant. Replace everything. Furniture. Artwork. This room starts fresh. She nodded, eyes shining. I stood at the window, overlooking the skyline, feeling the shift not just in the company, but in me. I had stripped them of their titles, their influence, their illusions. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break a sweat. I simply executed what they never thought I had the strength to do. Now I wasn't the woman behind the curtain. I wasn't the power they used to mask their failings. I was the force in full view. Chairwoman. CEO. And, for the first time, undisputed. The thing about ghosts is, they don't go away when you destroy the house. They linger. They find cracks in the walls of your silence. They scratch at the corners of your new life. And some of them? They were the face of the man you once called husband. After the dust settled and the headlines stopped buzzing about Evelyn Caldwell's fall from grace, I didn't expect to hear from Brandon. Not so soon. Not so shamelessly. But the messages started almost immediately. First, it was just a text. Can we talk? I stared at it for exactly 3 seconds before deleting it. No response. No reaction. That was the plan. Power wasn't in answering. Power was in refusing to play the same game twice. Then he called. I watched the screen light up, his name still saved in my phone out of habit, not sentiment. I let it ring. Then again. And again. That night, he showed up. I saw him from my 24th floor office window before security even alerted me. Standing at the front desk like a man who had a right to be there. Like he belonged. And for a brief second, a foolish, flickering second, I remembered the early Brandon. The boy with big dreams and fast words. The man who once held my hand in investor meetings when we were both too young to know what we were doing but bold enough to try anyway. But then I remembered the dinner table. I remembered Sienna's smug little smirk. I remembered how easily he let go of everything we built. I picked up the phone and called down. Escort him out. No exceptions. By the time security reached him, he was already halfway to the elevators, demanding to see me like a lover in an old film. Except this wasn't a film, and I wasn't waiting with tears and open arms. I was sitting behind the desk of the company he thought he stole from me, signing off on a new international expansion deal. Later that night, I found a note slid under my apartment door. His handwriting, still too neat, too careful. Helena, just give me 5 minutes. I know I made mistakes. I know I chose wrong. But you're still the smartest person I know. I was just lost. We can fix this. Fix this. As if he had broken a vase, not our entire history. As if betrayal was a math problem I could solve if I just tried hard enough. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing happened. I had meetings scheduled back to back, real work, real power. And yet, his presence lingered, a shadow stretching across the walls of my focus. He texted again. Please. Just once. I'll wait outside the building if I have to. I didn't reply. Instead, I reread the expansion projections. Clarion Crest was thriving. Our new ventures in Singapore and Berlin had opened doors we never thought possible. I had meetings with 2 major tech firms later that week, and the press was beginning to call me something new, the silent conqueror. I liked the sound of that. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. My victory hadn't come from tantrums. It came from strategy, silence, and unflinching resolve. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I didn't need to burn down the past to prove I'd survived it. I just needed to keep walking forward, past him, past her, past all of it. And yet, he kept calling. One night, I returned to find him outside my apartment building, just as he threatened. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. Like life had finally caught up with his charm and stripped it bare. Helena, he said, standing up straighter as I approached. Just listen. I didn't stop walking. You loved me once. I turned to him, keys in hand, heart steady. I loved a man who fought beside me, who didn't flinch when things got hard. I loved someone who saw me, not someone who tried to erase me the moment I made him feel small. His voice cracked. I didn't know what I was doing. You did, I said, sharper now. You just didn't think I'd survive it. We stared at each other for a long, long moment. Then I walked past him into the building, into my future, into the silence I had earned. He didn't follow. He never came again. As for Sienna? Her disappearance was quicker, colder. I heard whispers she'd moved on, tried to position herself as a luxury branding expert, failed spectacularly, and vanished into some influencer bubble of curated failure. She was never meant for this world. The one built on strategy, discipline, fire. She didn't belong in the trenches. She belonged in a photo shoot. But me? I belonged here. In boardrooms. In blueprints. In balance sheets. I belonged in power, not beside someone who couldn't handle it. The ghosts came. They knocked. They pleaded. But I never opened the door. I had work to do. It happened on a Tuesday. Fitting, really. Tuesdays were always the most unremarkable day of the week, quiet, in between, overlooked. Just like I used to be. I was reviewing a proposal for our expansion into Eastern Europe when my assistant's voice came through the intercom, hesitant for the first time in months. Miss Hart. Evelyn Caldwell is in the lobby. She's requesting 5 minutes of your time. I stared at the receiver like it had spoken a foreign language. Evelyn. Here. The woman who raised her wine glass and toasted to my replacement. The woman who once called me excess baggage in an email I wasn't supposed to see. The woman who built a glass kingdom and shattered it with her own pride. Should I call security? My assistant asked gently. I paused. No, I said. Send her up. 5 minutes. The elevator ride to the top floor took exactly 48 seconds. I used those seconds to fold the document on my desk, close the lid of my laptop, and prepare myself, not for confrontation, but for control. When the door opened, Evelyn stepped through slowly, almost cautiously. The years had caught up to her, though she wore them with defiance. Her usual elegance was still intact, the pearl earrings, the sharp heels, the steel gray suit. But her eyes looked softer. Not humble, not regretful. Desperate. She didn't sit until I gestured, and when she did, it was with a careful grace, as though she knew the seat no longer belonged to her. "You've done well," she said, voice low and even. "I'll give you that." "I didn't come here to be graded," I replied. She clasped her hands in her lap. "I didn't come to insult you." I waited. She inhaled. "I'd like to make an offer. An investment." I blinked. "You want to buy into Clarion Crest?" She nodded. "Not as an executive. Just a silent investor. A seat at the table. Behind the curtain. Nothing public." It was almost laughable. She was so used to manipulating the show from behind velvet ropes that even now, after everything, she believed she could whisper her way back in. "You had a seat," I said, leaning forward. "You had more than a seat, Evelyn. You had power. Influence. And you used it to try and erase me." She flinched, but only slightly. "I was protecting the company. Our legacy." "No," I corrected. "You were protecting your comfort. You were terrified that someone like me, someone you underestimated, could do what you failed to. I built this company with my husband." I cut her off with a slight shake of my head. "You inherited the name. The company was on life support when I got here. I gave it breath. I gave it teeth." Evelyn looked down for the first time since she walked in. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything." I studied her. Don't I? For 13 years, I bent myself backward for her approval. I memorized the rules of her world, played the dutiful wife to her son, carried the weight of a family that never truly welcomed me. And when I finally stood on even ground, she tried to push me off the cliff. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm asking for a chance to rebuild." "That's the difference between us," I replied. "You want to rebuild what was. I'm building what's next." Silence stretched. Then I said it. Calmly. Clearly. "There is no seat for you at this table anymore, Evelyn. Not even in the shadows." She swallowed. Her composure cracked, but just for a second. The tight press of her lips trembled. "I taught you everything," she whispered. "No," I said. "You taught me what not to become." She stood slowly, adjusting the cuffs of her sleeves, like dignity could be straightened out of wrinkles. "I see," she said. "Then this is goodbye." "Yes," I said. "It is." She turned toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth." "I always knew you were smart." I gave her a thin smile. "You should have bet on that." And, just like that, she was gone. No theatrics. No last blow. Just an ending. A quiet, final one. When the door closed behind her, I turned back to the window. The city was spread out below me like a chessboard. Somewhere out there, Evelyn would sit in one of her manicured estates, wondering how she lost everything. Wondering if she had said something differently, moved one piece slower, she might still be here. But it was too late. That table she once presided over? I had already replaced it. The chair she called hers? Burned. There was no space left for ghosts here. Only vision. Only forward. Only me. The headlines didn't bother me. They never had. If anything, they were useful. Power thrives in perception, and perception feeds on language. I read them not for validation, but to measure impact. The Iron Queen of Wall Street. Silent Conqueror. Helena Hart's quiet coup. How one woman turned betrayal into an $85 million power move. They tried to label me, contain me in headlines, but they couldn't write around the truth. I didn't claw my way back, I rewrote the foundation. This wasn't a comeback. It was a takeover. And now the world had no choice but to watch. Clarion Crest Holdings wasn't just alive, it was thriving. While Brandon and Evelyn were licking their wounds in quiet corners of their former circles, I was flying to Zurich, Seoul, Nairobi, signing deals that used to be pipe dreams, opening doors that had once been padlocked by old money and men with ancient ideas. They used to ask if I was the assistant when I walked into rooms. Now they asked how I wanted my coffee. The first major partnership came from a Scandinavian tech conglomerate that had previously passed on us twice. But this time, I was in the room, not Brandon. This time, the strategy came from someone who had actually built something from the ground up, not someone who'd coasted on legacy. They didn't shake my hand because of charm. They signed because I delivered. One by one, we brokered alliances. Logistics firms in Singapore, renewable energy contracts in South Africa, private banking access in Geneva. Every dotted line signed in my presence was another thread stitched into the new fabric of Clarion Crest. No more whispers in backrooms. No more stolen credit. No more Evelyn. No more Brandon. And no more Sienna, who'd been swallowed up by the same social media platform she tried to leverage for fame. Last I heard, she was peddling female empowerment merch online, cheap cotton printed with empty slogans. It was laughable. She had confused aesthetics for power, mistook presence for influence. The world didn't run on curated photos. It ran on strategy and silence. I had both. In meetings, they called me ruthless. In boardrooms, they called me brilliant. At dinners, they called me cold. I preferred prepared. Emotion doesn't move a company forward. Precision does. Planning does. And if that looked like steel to the untrained, oh good. Let them stare. Let them speculate. I had traded fragility for fire. And I was never going back. One afternoon, after finalizing a 3-country infrastructure bid that would triple our international profits, I sat back in the chair that once belonged to Evelyn and let myself feel the weight of it all. 13 years of sacrifice. Of building brick by brick what others tried to inherit without effort. 13 years of late nights, closed doors, and plans whispered only to myself. 13 years of invisibility, followed by a single year of reckoning. Now I was seen. But more importantly, I was untouchable. My phone buzzed. Another press request. Another feature. Another chance to shape the narrative. I ignored it. Because the truth didn't need more noise. It was already loud in the results. Our stock price had hit an all-time high. New hires had flooded in from companies that used to scoff at us. People who once only worked for names were now working for me. The interns asked if I'd teach a leadership seminar. The board stopped offering suggestions and started asking for direction. I didn't need Evelyn's approval anymore. The industry spoke for her now. And what it said was simple. Helena Hart built this empire. Not Evelyn. Not Brandon. And certainly not Sienna. They were footnotes in a story they tried to claim as theirs. Now, they were just cautionary tales. I walked through the office floor that evening, not in silence, but in respect. People greeted me differently now. With certainty. With admiration. The young associates, the finance team, the women who used to hide their ambition in soft voices, they looked at me like a mirror. Like maybe there was space for them too, now that someone had broken the gate. And I had. Not by asking nicely, but by kicking the door off its hinges and building a better one behind it. At the end of the corridor, a small framed quote sat on a console. I hadn't put it there. Someone must have added it recently. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. I smiled. Because that's what this was. Not corruption. Not revenge. Revelation. This wasn't the story of a woman scorned. It was the story of a woman unveiled. And now, they would never again touch the power they once mocked. They had the chance. They tried to bury me. Now, all they could do was watch the empire I built from the roots they thought were theirs. Clarion Crest was mine. And no one would ever forget who forged its throne. There's a kind of silence only power can afford, a stillness that settles over you when you no longer have to prove anything. When your work has already spoken in languages louder than applause and clearer than headlines. That's the silence I sat in now, at the top floor of Clarion Crest's headquarters. In the office, I redesigned from the ashes of a dynasty that once thought it could erase me. The skyline stretched before me, steel and glass glittering in the evening haze. The city never stopped moving, but for once, I did. Just for a moment. I leaned back in the chair, my chair, not inherited, not gifted, not borrowed. Earned. And I let the weight of it all settle in my bones, not like a burden, but like legacy. The real kind. The kind no one could rewrite. Because they had tried. Evelyn tried to rewrite it with veiled smiles and dinner table executions. Brandon tried with polished betrayal, smirks, and a new woman on his arm. Sienna tried with a swipe of lipstick and a stack of empty titles. They all tried to edit me out of the story I'd written line by line in silence, in strategy, in steel. But I took the pen back. And now the ending belonged to me. The wall across from my desk held 3 framed artifacts. Not degrees. Not awards. But the real markers of war and victory. The first, a copy of the original shareholder agreement, before I rewrote it with my 62% ownership. The margins still held Evelyn's notes in red ink, condescending and smug. I had framed it not to gloat, but to remember where I started. Small, doubted, underestimated. The second, a black and white photo of the first team I assembled after the purge. Real leaders. Thinkers. Builders. Not just people who inherited seats, but those who earned them. We had started with nothing but a broken boardroom and a battered name, and turned it into a global force. And the third, a quote I had scrawled on a post-it during my darkest hour. The night after the dinner. The night I refused to break. Let them think you are silent. Let them forget you are watching. Then rise. And I did. Now, Clarion Crest wasn't just a company, it was a movement. We didn't just build empires. We revived them, reimagined them. All across the globe, women in boardrooms whispered my name not like a legend, but a possibility. They saw me and thought, maybe I can. Not because I was loud, but because I had lasted. That's what legacy is. Not noise, not revenge, but endurance, continuity. And they could never take that from me. I heard the knock before the door opened. My assistant stepped in, tablet in hand. 2 things, Miss Hart, she said, always crisp, always efficient. First, the partnership documents from Oslo just came through. They're finalized. I nodded, signing without hesitation. Oslo made it 14 countries this quarter. The map was expanding faster than even I had planned. But that's the thing about control. Once you stop giving it away, the world becomes obedient to your vision. And second, she hesitated, a rare thing for her. A journalist from Forbes is requesting a cover feature. They want to call it The Woman They Couldn't Delete. I smiled faintly. Tell them no cover. But they can come in for a piece. Something small. Let them find the story without me handing it to them. Understood. She turned to go, then paused. Helena, do you ever think about what would have happened if they hadn't betrayed you? If they had just shared the crown? I looked past her, out into the endless skyline. They never would have. That's the point. They never saw me as someone worthy of the crown. They only saw someone useful, replaceable, disposable. She waited. I turned back to her. But I don't think about what could have happened anymore. I only think about what did. And what's next? That's the difference between dreaming and leading. She nodded and left. I stood and crossed to the glass wall, watching the lights blink awake across the city like stars falling upward. Somewhere, Brandon was probably still trying to make sense of how everything slipped through his fingers. Maybe he blamed Evelyn. Maybe he blamed Sienna. Maybe he still blamed me. Let him. Somewhere, Evelyn was likely sipping something expensive in a room full of ghosts, pretending it was still 1994, pretending she still had relevance. Maybe she told herself she could have been kinder. Maybe not. Let her. And Sienna? I no longer cared where she was. She had been a flash, brief, bright, and gone. People like her were always passing through. They never stayed long enough to shape anything permanent. But me? I stayed. I rose. I built. I led. This was my empire now. Not the one I was given. Not the one I was expected to decorate, but the one I fought for, bled for, and shaped with every word they thought I'd never say. And when the books are written, when Clarion Crest's history is taught in lecture halls, studied in strategy circles, whispered about in startup incubators, they won't start with Evelyn. They won't end with Brandon. And Sienna's name won't even be a footnote. They'll start with me. Helena Hart. The woman who refused to be erased. The woman who took the pen back. And never let go.